Good morning and welcome back to our segment, The Fascinating World of Birds. Today I'm joined with our very own bird enthusiast, Chanith Wijeratne, who is an avid bird watcher and a medical student. Welcome, Chanith.
Thank you for having me again.
So Chanith, what bird species will you be discussing with us today?
Today we'll discuss another one of my favourite commoner birds, the fan-tailed cuckoo.
And what are some interesting facts about this bird species?
Well, like all of the cuckoos, the fan-tailed cuckoo, it belongs to a group of birds that practice what's called brood parasitism. What this means is that the cuckoos don't themselves build their own nests. Rather, as you've probably heard, they will find a host, that usually being a smaller species, for instance, honey-eaters, finches, those sorts of birds, and then it will lay its egg in the nest of the other bird. Of course, if the hosts catch the cuckoo doing this, they'll try and send it off as soon as possible. But if they don't, and if they don't recognize that the egg differs, and often the cuckoos have evolved to have very similar looking eggs to their hosts, then the egg will hatch. The young cuckoo, once it hatches, will knock the other eggs out of the nest in a bid to secure dominance, basically. Then, when it calls, it actually sort of forces the host parents to feed it. There's a sort of obligate feeding mechanism there that I believe is, I don't know that much about, but essentially the host is forced to drop what it's doing and go feed this bird. And so you'll see in the wild a tiny host feeding a sort of Goliath cuckoo young, much bigger than the host is, and the cuckoo begging and begging, constantly hungry, and the host constantly using what little energy it has left to feed it. Then eventually the cuckoo will grow up, raised by this surrogate parent, meet another cuckoo, and fulfill the same cycle again.
Well, that is quite interesting. And you talked about feeding. What are these birds' diets like?
Well, it really depends on the bird. For instance, some of the cuckoos have a very fig-heavy diet, and so fruiting figs are a good place to see them. However, the fan-tailed cuckoo eats mostly insects and invertebrates. And
whereabouts in Melbourne can we find this bird species?
So the fan-tailed cuckoo, again like most of the cuckoos, is a spring and summer migrant. But it is a very common spring and summer migrant. So at around this time of year, the forests and grasslands of Melbourne are alive with the cuckoo's rich call, a sort of trilling sound that's very characteristic once you learn it. So essentially the answer to where can you find it is basically anywhere. Just listen for the call, and you'll realize as soon as you learn it that you hear it more often than you'll think.
That's quite remarkable, Chanith. Well, that brings us to the end of our segment this week. Thank you once again for joining us on the show and sharing your knowledge with us and our viewers at home.
Thanks again for having me.
See you next week as we discuss yet another fascinating bird species.